my daughter stood at the podium at her mother's memorial and spoke about letting go. She spoke beautifully. Her voice was steady, and her words were chosen with the particular care of someone who has rehearsed them more than once. She said that grief teaches us what we are holding too tightly. She said that the people we lose would want us to release the things that bind us to the past. She said that her mother, Eleanor, was a woman who understood that love sometimes means opening your hands. I sat in the front row and listened to every word, and I thought she has no idea what I let go of this morning, and what I decided to hold on to. What Katrina did not know, as she stood at that podium speaking about release and love and the wisdom of her mother, was that 3 hours earlier I had signed a document that changed everything she believed about what would happen when I was gone. She did not know because I had not told her. I had not told anyone except my lawyer and my son-in-law's worst nightmare, which is to say a man who had been waiting quietly for exactly the moment that had finally arrived. This is the story of what happens when a daughter mistakes a father's grief for surrender at the worst possible moment. My name is Walter Barrios. I am 69 years old. I was born in Gloucester, Massachusetts, the son of a Portuguese-American fisherman who believed that the sea was the only honest employer a man could have because it never pretended to be something it was not. My father worked those waters for 40 years, and he taught me everything he knew about reading weather, reading tide, and reading the particular quality of silence that precedes a storm. I did not become a fisherman. I became a merchant marine officer, which my father considered a respectable compromise between the sea and civilization. I spent 22 years at sea, working my way from third mate to captain on container vessels that crossed the Atlantic and Pacific and the routes in between. I came ashore for good at 44, not because I had lost my love for the water, but because Eleanor had spent 22 years raising our 2 children largely alone, and I had decided that the debt I owed her could no longer be serviced from a distance. Eleanor was the kind of woman who does not announce herself. She did not need to. She had a quality of stillness that made rooms settle when she entered them, and a directness that made conversation feel like something worth having. We had met at a harbor festival in Gloucester when I was 26, and she was 23, and she had looked at me the way people look at something they are deciding whether to take seriously. She decided to take me seriously. I have spent 43 years trying to deserve that decision. When I came ashore, I used the savings from 22 years of merchant marine wages and bought a small marina on the western shore of Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island. Barrios Marine had 12 slips when I bought it. Over the following 20 years, I expanded it to 48 slips, added dry storage for 60 vessels, built a proper service facility, and established a reputation on the bay for the kind of work that boat owners trust with vessels they genuinely care about. The marina was not a large business, but it sat on a piece of waterfront property that had become, over the years, worth considerably more than the business itself. The house sat on the same parcel, 50 meters from the marina office, a white Cape Cod that Eleanor and I had bought in 1994 when we moved the family from Gloucester to Rhode Island. It was not a grand house. 4 bedrooms, a wide porch facing the water, a garden that Eleanor tended with the same quiet determination she brought to everything else. She had planted a wisteria along the south side of the porch that was now thick and ancient and bloomed purple every May in a way that stopped people on the road. Eleanor passed 14 months ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, progressed quickly. We had 7 months from diagnosis to the end, and I will not describe those 7 months in this story because they belong to her and to me and to no one else. What I will say is that in those 7 months, Eleanor told me things I needed to hear and some things I did not want to hear, and that I have thought about all of them every single day since she passed. One of the things she told me was about the house. She said, "Walter, that house is yours, not anyone else's. Yours. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise until you are ready." I kept that sentence. I have kept it the way sailors keep a bearing, something fixed to navigate by when everything else is moving. Katrina is our daughter. She is 41 years old. She lives in Providence with her husband, Jonathan Reeves, who works in commercial property development and has the particular manner of a man who calculates the value of everything he looks at as a reflex rather than a choice. Jonathan is not a bad man. I want to be precise about that because precision matters in a story like this. He is not malicious. He is simply a man for whom everything is an asset or a liability, and for whom the line between family and opportunity has always been somewhat difficult to locate. Katrina has her mother's eyes and almost none of her mother's patience with ambiguity. She is decisive and organized and loving in the way of someone who expresses love primarily through management. In the years since Eleanor passed, she has called me every day, which I have appreciated, and she has come to the house on the bay every other weekend, which I have also appreciated, and she has spent a portion of nearly every visit discussing what I should do with the property, which I have appreciated somewhat less. Our son Marcus lives in Seattle. He is 38, a marine engineer, and visits twice a year. He called every week after Eleanor passed and sent care packages that arrived with the regularity of a man who cannot be present in person but who will not allow that absence to go unacknowledged. Jonathan joined the family 12 years ago. He and Katrina met through mutual friends in Providence and were married after 2 years in a ceremony at the marina that Eleanor organized with her characteristic efficiency and warmth. I have always found Jonathan professionally impressive and personally difficult to read, which are not mutually exclusive qualities but which, in a son-in-law, tend to require attention. In the 14 months since Eleanor passed, Jonathan's attention to the property on the bay had increased in ways I had noticed without yet naming. The first sign came 6 weeks after Eleanor passed, at a Sunday dinner that Katrina had organized at the house with the stated purpose of helping me sort through practical matters. She arrived with Jonathan and 2 printed documents from a Providence real estate firm. She set them on the kitchen table between our coffee cups and explained that she had asked Jonathan's colleague to prepare a current market assessment of the property so that I would have accurate information for estate planning purposes. The assessment valued the marina parcel and the house together at $4.2 million. The marina alone was assessed at $1.8. The house and land were assessed at $2.4. I looked at the numbers. I said they seemed accurate based on what I had seen in the market. Jonathan said, "Walter, land like this on the bay is only going to appreciate. The question is whether you want to be managing a marina at your age or whether it makes more sense to convert that asset into something more passive." I said I had been managing the marina for 20 years and had not yet found it unmanageable. He smiled. He said, "Of course. I just mean long term." Katrina said, "Dad, we're just thinking about your future. Mom would have wanted you to be comfortable." I said I was comfortable. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 1 day. Then I called Marcus. Marcus listened without interrupting, which is his way. When I finished, he said, "Dad, has Jonathan been involved in any property transactions near the bay recently?" I said I did not know. He said, "I'll find out." Marcus called back 3 days later. Jonathan's development firm had been quietly assembling parcels on the western shore of the bay for 18 months, 3 acquisitions already completed. The marina property was the parcel that would allow the assembled site to reach the minimum acreage for the mixed-use development Jonathan's firm had been planning. Without the marina parcel, the development did not work. I looked at the wisteria on the south side of the porch and I thought about Eleanor and what she had said about the house. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Wren. She had practiced estate and property law in Providence for 28 years and had been recommended to me by the attorney who had handled the marina's business contracts for a decade. She was 61, methodical, and had a gift for asking the question that clarified everything. When I described what Marcus had found, she said, "Walter, what does your current will say about the property?" I told her. Eleanor and I had written our wills together 8 years ago. Mine left the marina and the house to Katrina and Marcus in equal shares, with a provision that if either child wished to sell their share, the other had right of first refusal. Patricia said, "So under the current will, if Katrina inherited half the property and Marcus was unwilling or unable to exercise right of first refusal, She could sell her half to Jonathan's firm, I said, or Jonathan could pressure Marcus. Patricia said yes. I sat with that. She said, "Has anything happened that suggests they're trying to accelerate the timeline?" 10 days after the Sunday dinner, Katrina called on a Tuesday evening. She mentioned, with the careful casualness of someone who has prepared a conversation in advance, that there were significant tax advantages to transferring property during one's lifetime rather than through a will. She said Jonathan had a contact at a title company who could handle the paperwork quickly. I said I would think about it. After we hung up, I wrote down every word she had said. The date, the time, the exact phrasing. I had been a ship's captain for 22 years. Accurate logging is not a habit I have ever lost. Patricia read my notes and said, "Walter, they need your signature on a deed transfer. That is the only way this happens, which means you have time, and time is what we're going to use." What Patricia built over the following 3 weeks was precise and thorough. The centerpiece was a revised will, not a dramatic rewrite. A careful, targeted amendment that changed 3 things. The first was the disposition of the house. Under the new will, the house on the bay was placed in a separate trust, the Barrios Family Trust, of which I was the sole trustee during my lifetime. The trust named Marcus as successor trustee. The house could not be sold, transferred, or encumbered without the written approval of the trustee. Upon my death, control would pass to Marcus as trustee, and any sale of the house required unanimous agreement between Marcus and Katrina as beneficiaries, with a mandatory 12-month deliberation period before any transaction could be executed. The second change concerned the marina. The operating business was restructured as a separate LLC with a new operating agreement that required both beneficiaries to agree to any change in ownership or use. Critically, the agreement specified that the marina could only be operated as a marine services facility for a period of 15 years from the date of the agreement. Jonathan's mixed-use development required rezoning and change of use. The operating agreement made that substantially more difficult. The third change was the one Patricia suggested, and which I accepted immediately. A letter of intent, signed by me and witnessed, stating that the property on the bay was to remain in the Barrios family for a minimum of 15 years following my death, and that any beneficiary who participated in a transaction that violated this intent would forfeit their beneficial interest in the trust. Patricia reviewed the documents 3 times. I signed them on a Thursday morning, 4 days before Eleanor's memorial. I called Marcus that evening. I told him everything. The market assessment, Jonathan's development plans, the conversation about lifetime transfer, what Patricia had built, and what I had signed. Marcus was quiet for a long time. He said, "Dad, I should have said something sooner about Jonathan." I said, "You told me when you were certain. That's what mattered." He said, "What do you need from me?" I said, "Come to the memorial, and say nothing until I tell you it's time." He flew in from Seattle on Friday. Eleanor's memorial was on a Sunday afternoon in October, 41 days after she passed. We had delayed it at the request of her sister in Vancouver, who needed time to arrange travel. The delay had given me time I had not expected to have, and which I had used carefully. The memorial was held at the marina, which was where Eleanor had always said she wanted it if she had any say in the matter. We set up chairs on the dock facing the water. 61 people came, neighbors and friends and people from the marine community who had known Eleanor for 20 years and who came because they genuinely wanted to be there, which is the only kind of attendance at a memorial that means anything. The day was clear and cold, with the particular quality of October light on the bay that makes everything look like it has been given a final coat of varnish. The water was still. The wisteria on the house had gone to dried brown twists, but you could still see the shape of what it would be again in May. Katrina organized the service. She had done it with love and thoroughness, and an eye for the details that Eleanor would have appreciated. The flowers were right. The music was right. The order of speakers was right. I gave her full credit for that, and I mean it genuinely. Katrina spoke third, after Eleanor's sister and after a longtime friend from the garden club. She walked to the small podium we had set up at the end of the dock, and she looked out at the assembled group, and then she looked at me in the front row, and she began to speak. She spoke about her mother, about what Eleanor had taught her about patience, and about the particular strength that comes from knowing when to hold on and when to release. She said that her mother had understood that grief binds us to the past, and that true love means eventually allowing ourselves to move forward. She said that the greatest gift Eleanor had given her was the understanding that letting go is not abandonment, but rather a form of trust. Trust that what we have built will continue without us holding it in place. She looked at me when she said that last sentence. I looked back at her. She held my gaze for a moment with an expression I recognized as the one she had been preparing for this moment, warm and certain and carrying beneath it the particular weight of a point being made. I nodded once, the way a father nods when he has heard his daughter. What I did not tell her, sitting in that front row in the October light on the dock where Eleanor had always loved to stand in the evenings, was that 3 hours before the memorial I had driven to Patricia's office and signed the final amended version of my will and the trust documents and the marina operating agreement, and that every one of those documents was now filed and registered and entirely beyond the reach of any conversation about letting go. I had let go of a great many things that morning. I had let go of the version of the future where I did nothing and trusted that family meant what I had always believed it meant. I had let go of the discomfort of acting deliberately in the face of something I had hoped I was misreading. What I had not let go of was the house, or the marina, or the 15 years of protection I had built around both of them in the 3 weeks since Patricia had first asked me what my will said. I sat in the front row and listened to my daughter speak about release, and I thought about Eleanor and about what she had said about the house and about the particular quality of strength that comes not from holding on but from having already secured what matters before anyone asks you to let it go. 3 days after the memorial, Katrina came to the house alone. Jonathan had a meeting, she said. She arrived in the morning with coffee from the place in town that Eleanor had always preferred, and she sat at the kitchen table in the chair where her mother used to sit, and she looked at me with the expression of someone who believes the conversation they are about to have has already been won. She said, "Dad, I've been thinking about what I said at the memorial." I said, "It was a beautiful speech." She said, "I meant it, about letting go, about moving forward." A pause. "Jonathan has been talking to some people about the property. There's real interest, Dad. Serious interest. And the timing is actually very good right now." I said, "Tell me about the interest." She said Jonathan's firm had identified a development opportunity on the western shore, that the marina parcel was central to it, that the offer being discussed was well above market assessment, that it would give me financial security for the rest of my life and free me from the responsibility of managing the business. She slid a document across the table, a letter of intent from Jonathan's development firm, an offer of $4.8 million for the marina parcel and the house together. She placed a pen beside it. She said, "Dad, this is what moving forward looks like. This is what Mom would have wanted for you." I looked at the document. I looked at the pen. I looked at my daughter sitting in her mother's chair with her mother's eyes and the absolute certainty of someone who has already decided how this room will go. I picked up the pen. I held it for a moment. Then I set it down. I reached into the folder I had placed on the counter that morning and I put 3 documents on the table: the amended will, the Barrios family trust, the marina operating agreement. I said, "Katrina, I need to show you something." She looked at the documents. She picked up the trust first. She read the first page. Her expression changed at the unanimous consent clause. She read the operating agreement. She read the 15-year use restriction. She set them down carefully. She said, "When did you do this?" I said, 3 weeks ago. I signed the final versions the morning of your mother's memorial." A silence. She said, "Dad, I was trying to help you." I said, "I know." She said, "Jonathan's firm would have given you financial security. You wouldn't have to manage the marina anymore. I said, Katrina, your mother is buried in the cemetery on the hill above this bay. That wisteria she planted on the south porch has been growing for 26 years. Marcus learned to sail from this dock. I captained vessels across 3 oceans for 22 years, and I came ashore here because this is where our family is. I kept my voice level the way I had kept it level on bridges in weather that required steadiness. I am not ready to let go of this, and I will decide when I am ready, not Jonathan's development timeline. She said nothing for a long moment. She was looking at the trust documents. She said, Does Marcus know? I said, Marcus knows everything. Another silence. She said, He never said anything. I said, I asked him not to, until it was time. She looked out the window at the water, at the marina, at the wisteria. Her expression shifted through several things I recognized from her childhood: the initial resistance, the recalculation, and finally the particular quality of stillness that meant she had arrived at something she did not entirely want to acknowledge. She said, Jonathan is going to be very disappointed. I said, I imagine he will be. She said, He's been planning this for a long time. I said, I know. I found out about the other parcels. She looked at me. I said, 3 weeks ago, Marcus found out first. A very long silence. She said, Did you think I knew? I said, I thought you knew more than you were saying. I don't know how much more. She looked at the table, at her mother's chair which she was sitting in, at the coffee she had brought from Eleanor's favorite place, which was going cold between her hands. She said, I didn't know about the other parcels. I knew he wanted the property. I told myself it was just business. I said, I know. She said, Dad, I'm sorry. I said, I know you are. We sat for a while without speaking. The water was visible through the kitchen window, going silver in the late morning light. A boat was moving out of the marina toward the open bay. I said, Stay for lunch. I'll make what your mother used to make on Sundays. She stayed. I am 69 years old. I have spent 43 years married to a woman who understood things before I did and who was kind enough to explain them to me without making me feel slow. I have spent 22 years at sea and 20 years on this shore, and I have learned from both that the water does not care about your plans. It cares about your preparation. Katrina and Jonathan are working through what happened between them. That is their work to do. She called me 2 weeks after that morning in the kitchen and said that she had told Jonathan she would not be involved in any further conversations about the property. She said it in the direct way of her mother, without drama and without qualification. I told her that was enough. It was more than enough. Marcus came for Thanksgiving. We ate on the porch in coats because Eleanor always insisted on eating on the porch at Thanksgiving regardless of the weather, and neither of us was ready to stop. The wisteria was bare, but the structure of it was still there, all those years of growth visible in the thickness of the vine. He said, She's okay, you know, Katrina. She just got turned around. I said, I know she is. The marina is running well. In the spring, I am going to repaint the main dock and replace the fuel dock hardware that has needed replacing for 2 years. There is not always something else. Sometimes you simply have to do the work that needs doing. The wisteria will come back in May. It always does. Eleanor planted it from a cutting she took from her mother's garden the year we moved here. 26 years of growth. The oldest living thing on this property that she put in the ground herself. I am not going anywhere. If you are a person who has lost someone and found in the quiet that follows that the people around you have begun to speak about your future as though it is a problem to be solved rather than a life to be lived, I want you to say this clearly. Grief is not a transaction. Loss is not an opportunity. A man who has spent a lifetime reading water and weather and the silence that precedes a storm knows exactly what he is looking at when the conditions change. Eleanor told me the house was mine. It still is. Tell me in the comments, has someone ever tried to use your grief against you? I want to hear from you.